Hello, everyone. I am so honored to have Jordana Brown here today on the show. I'm so excited. I actually know Jordana because we briefly worked together at Aisha Torah about 10 years ago, and she was a madricha, right? Were you a madricha, Aish?
Yes, I was.
Yes, and I was an event planner, and I always looked up to you in a way where I didn't grow up observant. I grew up traditional in a traditional background, and I always saw you as a madricha, and you were doing kiruv, and I was always very inspired by your enthusiasm and your passion for Judaism.
Aw,
And I knew I had to get you on the podcast because,
aw.
yes, Jordana is part of my Aliyah series, People Who Made Aliyah to Israel. She made Aliyah how many years ago?
It is now 6.5 years.
6.5 years ago, and
Yeah.
I knew I had to get her on the show here today. Jordana, welcome to Soul Sessions with KK.
Oh, thank you so much. This is like a huge honor. It's like a really big deal for me.
It's
I
a really
appreciate it.
big deal for me, especially since you're doing Brown and Bidud, which
Oh,
I'll explain later. Jordana is currently in quarantine in Israel, and she has a series on her IGTV on Instagram called Brown and Bidud, and she'll tell you more about that in the show.
yes.
But Jordana, can you just introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I love the introduction talking about Aish because it was such a special time in my life. I was very involved before I made Aliyah. I was very involved in Jewish outreach and Kiruv. I worked with Aish. I worked with a group called Maor for a short time, and I worked with Birthright. And the best part of my volunteering was showing people that being observant and keeping mitzvot was both doable and fun and beautiful
And
uh,
cool.
and cool. Right. So it's so funny because when I was when I worked for Aish, I really presented as much more of like a mainstream from girl. I wore skirts and long sleeves and blah, blah, blah. I was like this cool from girl. So it was like you could be someone who was interested in putting yourself together and someone who was interested in music and someone who was interested in books and everything like that, and also be observant. So I think I filled that niche pretty well. But I don't feel any different in terms of my connection to God now that I'm like less, outwardly from looking. I feel just as connected, if not more so now that I live in Israel. So
Can
I'm,
you explain that transformation? You say that you're outwardly less religious
oh,
looking.
sure,
So can you explain how that came about? Like what were the
sure.
factors that made the
Yeah.
decision?
I think that, this is just as real as we're going to be because I'm not really going to sugarcoat it or anything.
Great. We
Um, I
like that.
think, I think that I became how I was because I went to Israel for the year, which, I went to seminary, and I really fell in love with, you know, observance. And I also really felt like that was the path that I was meant to take. And that was the path that was going to lead me to my husband. And that was the path that my future home was going to take. And so it all made sense at the time. I think that a lot of people, because as you said, that was 10 years ago. So I'm in my 30s now. And I think that when a person is single for a particular period of time, they need to do what works for them internally to maintain the relationship with God that they feel most comfortable with. And it's very easy to say, I'm going to wear X, Y, and Z. I'm going to have this relationship with the opposite sex. I'm going to, learn this amount of Torah every day. And I'm going to spend this amount of time in prayer. And it's like a really beautiful and worthy goal. But I think sometimes life gets in the way. And sometimes the things that you found super, super important at 21, you don't find as important at 31. You kind of have to maintain a sense of balance within yourself so that you can continue to have a good relationship with God. And for me, I never wanted it to be all or nothing. I never wanted it to be, I'm going to do all these things. And then when I'm not, I'm doing nothing. I wanted it to be, I want to maintain a relationship with God that is real and that is sincere, but also live a life where I can be comfortable being single and, kind of maintaining my sanity in that way. So I think a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who have stayed single and completely kind of been uninterested in religion. I have a lot of friends who have stayed single and maintained exactly their level of observance, which I just think is incredible, and kol hakavod to them. And then I have a lot of friends like me who are, as they say, chilled out, So
Right. That you
that's
can be
where we are.
observant, but still find your own path, not necessarily following a certain like journey that's set out for you from the very beginning, like the typical cookie cutter version
Exactly.
that, right.
It's hard to follow that cookie cutter existence when your foundation is so not cookie cutter. Being single and observant and Jewish at 30 is not typical. I mean, it's becoming much more common, but it's not the roadmap. It's not what they tell you in seminary. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like what you grow up thinking will happen. So the fact that you have to adapt.
Right. Do you think that if you weren't single at that time and you found someone, do you feel like you would have explored your Judaism in the same way that you did today?
I think that very much depends on the other person. When you're single, you don't have to depend on any other person. You don't have to depend on your significant other, and you don't have to depend on your children. So I can just say, like my sisters, for example, we were all very much in the same milieu, and they got married and they had kids. And so I think that they kind of maintained the status quo much more than I did, because they married guys who were what they were looking for at the time, and they sent their kids to certain schools, and that kind of keeps them within that path. And had I married, I mean, I know a lot of people who got married and were so Haredi and so religious and ultra Orthodox and then aren't anymore. So I really can't say where I would be. I can't even say where I'll be,
Yeah,
when I do find someone.
exactly. Do you feel that Israel is a better place for single Jewish men and women to
Ooh.
explore their individuality and even find a partner? Because, I actually was thinking about this when I was single and I was having a hard time in New York. I didn't feel like the environment was supporting me. And
So
yeah, like I felt like Israel was a better place to support me. What are your thoughts on that?
it's an interesting question, because you're really on the money there, because I think that it's a different support system. In America, I had my friends from growing up and my family. So they're always a support system that you don't have when you move to Israel. So that support system is gone. So you need to find a new support system. So what you were saying about that's totally different. And so, like, I have friends who came to Israel and wanted to try it out, and they felt that they had friends here, and they even had some family members here, but they felt that their support system was in America, so they went back to America. But I do feel like the Upper West Side is not for everyone. Brooklyn, like Flatbush, is not for everyone. You know what I mean? And so you're kind of limited in where you can be a single person in New York. And to a large extent, New York is really the best option you have, because even in big cities like Miami, like Los Angeles, like Toronto, you're going to run out of people at some point. You know what I mean? So New York is really your best option in terms of like the dating pool. And I love Israel because the dating pool includes Jews from all over the world, meaning you're going to get French Jews, you're going to have Australian Jews, Irish Jews, Indian Jews. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to have that in New York, as cosmopolitan as it is.
Yeah, that's true.
So, if you're Bashert, and I put that in quotes because I'm not like the hugest Bashert
Yeah,
cheerleader, but if your Bashert is from South Africa, then you're much more likely to meet him in Israel than you are in New York, in my opinion.
yeah. I also find that Israel is more chill when it comes to, the dating scene. I don't even know if there's like this distinction between singles and married couples and engaged couples. I feel like in New York, there's so much more of that pressure and those
Yeah.
boxes that everybody has to be in. You're single, you're engaged, you're dating, you're married. People don't really mingle as much together. Whereas in Israel, everybody is just together. So my question for you is, do you feel less pressure to get married now that you're in Israel?
I think that I think, yes, I do, but that's really a consequence of me as a person. And what you were saying is true to an extent. I think for Olim, for people who've made Aliyah on their own, there is less of a pressure because we don't live with our families. I think if you ask the same question to a girl in their 30s who's Israeli and their family is around, and their community is around them, and their bubby and their safta is around them, I think that the pressure that I felt in New York, they feel here. Mm-hmm. But since my family's in New York and all of my friends here are single, I don't feel the pressure. I feel like a normal person. And I think that people feel the pressure when they're in, New York, for example, because all of their friends are living in Bergenfield. All of their friends are living in Woodmere. They're all together. They're all married. They all have families. And so if you are single, you kind of don't live in Bergenfield, so you're not hanging out with those people to the same extent. Whereas my friends who are married in Tel Aviv live down the block from me. Yeah. So we're living a very parallel life.
Right. In what ways is the New York dating scene better than it is in Israel?
Is it better?
Is it better?
No. I can't really think of any ways that it's better. I'm going to say that, but I was also when you're dating at 21 and when you're dating at 31, regardless, it's going to be different. But I will say a guy in New York is very expected to pay for a meal or a drink or whatever. And I will say in Israel, it's much more common for a girl to offer to pay. I'm a New Yorker and I'm an American. I would never in my life offer to pay. I apologize. It's just the way it is. If someone asked, I would never say no, but I'm never pulling out the wallet. So that's definitely a differential. But I don't think it's better in any way in New York. I mean, people have cars there, so maybe that's better. You know what I mean? You get picked up, but no, I don't think it's better in any way. Honestly, and this is no shade to New York, which is what it is. I just don't see anything more preferable in America.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, whoever's listening to this is single or married. Let's see if Jordana can convince us to move to Israel.
Okay, so I think it's a different mentality for someone who's married and someone who's single. So you're definitely going to have different reasons to move.
Right.
My reason was Zionism.
Tell us about your reason. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Zionism to me means the Jewish imperative to settle in their native homeland, in their indigenous homeland, which is Israel. I believe that the greatest miracle that the Jewish people have seen in the past 2,000 years is returning to their homeland and the fact that we have a Jewish state. I think the Jewish people have prayed for Jerusalem and for Israel for 2,000 years, and now it's here, and you can come here and they'll pay you to come here. And I think it's very weird that people don't want to, or choosing not to. It will never not be weird to me how shocked people are that I made Aliyah, and how really, and this is, no offense to anyone, how little most people I know in America want to make Aliyah. I mean, it's shocking to me but it shouldn't be, because that's how I grew up. I grew up completely uninterested in making Aliyah. So I totally get it, intellectually.
So what sparked your interest all of a sudden if you didn't grow up with that?
It's a good question. So I feel like you and I probably similar. We grew up pro-Israel, right? Yeah. So Israel's great. Israel's wonderful. We support Israel. We support it monetarily. We go visit. We, if God forbid they're ever in a conflict, we pray for Israel. always extremely pro-Israel. I feel like there's a distinction between pro-Israel and Zionist. And Zionist is wanting to actually make Israel your home. And that change happened for me because I did Birthright. I was a counselor on Birthright 12 times. Wow. And over the course, right, crazy.
That surpasses my 4 times for sure.
See? I actually won an award at some point for being so,
wow.
So in the mix. But now people have totally surpassed me because I stopped doing it, obviously.
Yeah.
But at some point in the middle, I was just like, this really is less of a, like, I wish I could, and it became much more real. And I gave myself 1 year because I really wanted to move with a husband. And I think a lot of people, and I don't know who your audience is, but I think that there are going to be some people who are watching this or listening to this and thinking, yeah, I would love to move with a husband. And I have to tell you that I hope that works out for you, but I really, really don't think that that should be a motivating factor. It's very likely that your husband is here. Just because I haven't found mine yet doesn't mean that literally 100 of my friends who made Aliyah, they all found guys here. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I've been to more weddings in the past 6 years than I was in the 6 years, in the 12 years before then.
Interesting.
So yeah, people are like loving life here. They're doing great.
Well, what about with COVID right now? I mean, we hear stories in the media and in WhatsApp groups how dreadful the situation is in Israel and how Israel is literally making it impossible for people to live a normal life there or for people to move to the country.
Right. Well, it's so funny because I have this one friend and I love her to bits and pieces. And she constantly says, I can't, like, why isn't the country letting me in? Why isn't it letting me in? I want to come visit. I want to come stay. I want to come see if it works. And I said, you're allowed in if you make Aliyah. All citizens are allowed to be in Israel. So there are people who don't want to pull the trigger and make Aliyah. And I totally understand. They don't want to be, forced to make Aliyah. And I totally get it. But I also understand why Israel is not letting in visitors right now, especially considering what you said, that we're spiking. I mean, we had 5,000 new cases yesterday, and it is really overwhelming. So that's the sad part, right? So they have to do the lockdown so that the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. Israel is, I feel like everybody who is listening or watching knows that Israelis do not take direction well. They don't like to be told what to do. A lockdown is essentially telling you what you can do, where you can go, and how you can live your life. So the first one went really well over Pesach because it was this really, really scary disease. The second one did not go well. And then now we're in a third one and it's like really ridiculous. It's a joke. In my opinion, the only people it's affecting and hurting are the store owners and the restaurant owners. It's really, really a sad situation. Yeah. I really do think that Israel is just buying time until we're vaccinated. And that's the glimmer of hope. That's the optimism, because Israel is number one in the entire world by a long shot in terms of citizens who've been vaccinated. And they hope to inoculate the entire population within 2 months.
That's a shame.
Which is, please God, the most amazing thing that you can imagine. I mean, not the entire population, but herd immunity, 70 to 80% of the people will be vaccinated by then. And then we can go back to regular life, and that's like, I mean, I'll take a few days of, chilling at home if I can then live my life 6 to 10 months earlier than the rest of the world,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what makes Israel so special are the restaurants and the bars and the shooks and the people of Israel is what makes people want to go to Israel. I think that people have a valid reason why they're scared to make Aliyah or to travel to Israel right now, because if they're like, if I'm going to Israel, I don't want to be stuck in a hotel or an apartment.
Totally. I mean,
what's the point?
You were saying how I was in Bidud, and I have this like series where I talk about being in Bidud. And so Israel has a mandatory quarantine when you come back from the States or anywhere abroad. And it was 14 days and now it's 10 days. So it's amazing. Tomorrow, please God, will be my last day.
God willing.
God willing. Pray for me. And so they do that, and then they started this thing called hotel quarantine. So they were sending people to hotels without, do not pass go, do not go home, do not collect your stuff. You have to go immediately to a hotel. So I found that out, and I changed my flight so that I would come back to Israel a day, like 2 days earlier, so that I would avoid it. Anyway, if you go to this, the reason that they instituted hotel quarantine, they're not masochists. I mean, some might argue that they are, but the reason is because Israelis are, as I mentioned, not good at following directions. So I read a statistic that said 3 in 4 or 2 in 3, I'm not really sure. I think it was 3 in 4. 3 in 4 Israelis do not follow quarantine when they're home. And that was the fear. The fear was that, there was this new strain coming from England and South Africa and whatever it is. And they didn't want to just punish, Brits and South Africans. So they were going to put everyone in the COVID hotels. I mean, I hear it, I know many, 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 many people who have broken quarantine or do not take it seriously. I am not those people, but I know them.
I mean, that happens in New York and everywhere around America as well.
They don't have mandatory quarantine.
Right. We don't have mandatory quarantine, but I just feel like it's a Jewish trait. I think that we don't like being told what to do, and we need to fight.
I mean, if you think about it, that's very much a right-wing American trait as well.
Don't impose on my rights, right?
My family is conservative. Like, that's very much the mentality that we've been told. But I'm very much a believer in Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh, and we have to do what's best for the community and for the people around us. And so I get it. You know what I mean? Even though I'm maybe not infected, or I'm not doing anything wrong, or I'm following all the rules, I'm not I'm not everyone.
Yeah. So I know in New York it plays out like there's this war between the maskers and the anti-maskers, the vaccine people and the anti-vaccine people. How does it play out in Israel? Is there
I think that exists. I mean, I live in Tel Aviv, so Tel Aviv is often called the bubble. So we don't really live life like the rest of the country. We kind of do our own thing in general, like in every way. If most of the country votes, right wing, Tel Aviv is very, aggressively left wing and things like that. If the country is, poor or whatever, or like living below the poverty line, people in Tel Aviv are just like, balling out, doing great.
Right.
So in Tel Aviv, so my perspective is a bit skewed, but there are wars, there are fights, there's probably 2 to 3 protests a week.
Yeah.
About masking and about
my friend's husband was stuck in traffic 2 days ago for 4.5 hours.
That wasn't masking.
Oh, that was like something else, like someone.
Yeah, it was like someone who left the army, or
yeah. I hear the
So-
police in Israel are like, I'm not
It's
hearing
so funny
such
because
things about
Israelis
them.
really, we revere the IDF, and
Right.
we have major issues with the police.
That's interesting because in America you kind of see a parallel.
Totally.
With this whole like defund the police movements.
Totally.
When everyone became anti-police all of a sudden since the whole George Floyd incident. And now you're seeing something that's going on in Israel. I'm not sure if that's some sort of like...
It's not against, I mean, people are not really against the police in Israel. I think that there's just a general mistrust of the police. I think the police, and thankfully, I'm an Ashkenaz little American innocuous like rule follower. So I've never really had any issues with the police, but I can see how if someone has had a run-in with the police, it might not have gone well. So I can't, kind of minimize their experience with the police. I wish that I had more faith in the Israeli police. There was one time when I actually had to fill out a report for some reason, and it was obviously traumatic, and I did it. And a week later, I, checked what was going on with my case, and they had closed it without telling me, and they had not called one person on my behalf. So, I'm not a huge believer in them, but I'm going to still follow all the laws. You know what I mean? I'm not, and I certainly, because I'm someone who's so careful about COVID, I'm certainly not protesting COVID, with 30,000 other people. That's just never going to be me.
Right, exactly. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you don't like about Israel? I know that's a tough question. I mean,
Um,
I know you say like the police are not your style. I mean,
right,
and
right,
Israelis don't follow the rules. Is
right.
there anything else about Israel that you're like, oh, this is
I'll
what I
tell you,
like about you?
number one, and this is just because I think everything else that I don't like about Israel is workable. So number one for me is being so far from my family. And I think that anyone who moves here without their family, that's going to be the main thing that bothers them. And it's the main thing that will bother them and never stop bothering them. Meaning there's a million things that in the beginning I had issues with that now I don't even notice or think about. But that's the only thing that's really kind of maintained over the 6.5 years. Like missing your family will never stop. So that's a bummer. I think that what what people want me to say is the economic situation, and I understand that the economic situation is different than the United States, and some might say worse.
Yeah.
But the standard of living and the way people in Israel live is not makes the disparity seem less. Meaning, you don't need as much to be happy and comfortable in Israel as you do in America. I have friends in New York who are, collectively making upwards of $200,000 a year and struggling. Okay.
That's
That is
insane.
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 So
It's like never
that's
enough.
insane. That's insane to me. So, from that perspective, come to Israel, your house might be a bit smaller. You might have one car instead of two or two cars instead of three, but your quality of life is significantly better.
I always hear that like quote, your quality of life is going to be better. I have friends that say the quality of life here is so much better than New York. Can
It's
you
not, it's not, it's not a roll in your eyes. It's a reality.
No, so can you just give me an example of like what that means to you, how the quality of life means better?
Okay. I think the easiest way to say it is that everyone around you is your family. You are living in a place where everyone wants you to succeed, to be happy, to be healthy, to be part of the community. Everyone is there for you. Like we were talking about the COVID vaccines, and someone said, I was talking to a friend in America, and she goes, I'm very skeptical about the vaccine in America, but not about the vaccine in Israel, because in Israel, clearly the government doesn't want their savta to die. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like they're not gonna do anything to harm, their doctors and their elderly people, because we're a family, we're a community, we're a nation. So I think that that's what they mean by quality of life, but also not killing yourself at work and spending a lot more family time and a million parks, and the weather is better for so much of the year. I mean, like, I guess unless you're from Florida or Los Angeles, but the weather is so much nicer, and every event is geared toward you as a Jewish person.
Yeah.
Like, I remember one of the things that blew my mind was there was a huge festival in the summer in Jerusalem, and I went to the food court, and I said to my friend, oh, but like, do they have tudot? Which one's kosher? And he said, they're all kosher. You know what I mean? Like, that I could go to a mall and eat in any restaurant is crazy to me. That's a quality of life thing.
Yeah. Well, what about people who say that in Tel Aviv it's very hard to find like one kosher restaurant, or that it's sometimes very hard to be observant when you live in an area in Israel that is completely secular? So
So,
how
okay.
do you balance that?
So that's a good question. Number one, if that person said that, then they haven't been to Tel Aviv in 10, possibly 20 years. So that's first of all. Second of all, to a person who it's really important to not live in a secular community, I would say, do not move to Tel Aviv. move to one of the 300 communities that would be better suited to you. But in terms of Tel Aviv, I'm an observant person, and I'm a Shomer Shabbat person, and I keep kosher. And we have a million options of places to eat that are kosher, and we have a million options of shuls to go to. And I mean, I probably became more dedicated to my personal observance once moving to Tel Aviv than I ever was back in Jerusalem.
That's so interesting, Jordana.
I know.
I feel like I'm similar to you in that sense, where I I went to public school my whole life. Pretty much my whole life. I left a
Right.
conservative yeshiva in 4th grade, and then I went to public school my whole life. And I
Yeah.
always yearned to be in yeshiva. I always wanted to connect to God. And I always tell myself, like, if my parents put me in yeshiva, I probably wouldn't be observant today.
You think so? Wow. Because you
I'm
didn't have the
serious.
yearning.
Yeah. And like, I feel like when I'm surrounded by too much Judaism all around me, going down my throat, I'm like, I can't. But when I'm able to breathe and I have space and I can see people for who they are, and it's not just like Torah, 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 I have more of a connection to Hashem.
100%. I think in Jerusalem, you didn't. I lived in Jerusalem for the first 3.5 years that I lived here, and then I moved here. So when I lived in Jerusalem, I felt like religion was just all around me all the time. Observance was around me all the time. I never went to shul when I was in
So
Israel. When I was in
interesting.
Jerusalem, I know it was like just it was just like automatic. And when I moved to Tel Aviv, you have to make a choice, and you have to decide, where you're going to go to shul. You have to decide where you're going to eat your Shabbat meals, what you're going to, you know what I mean, like how you're going to get your food. It's not difficult. It's all around you. But before COVID, I went to shul every single week. And I worked with organizations where we hosted 150 people a week.
Wow.
So and I certainly wasn't doing that in New York.
Yeah, that's so true. Can you tell us about Israel? What about Israel exceeded your expectations
Exceeded my expectations. I
that
think
you
that
didn't expect?
my expectations were pretty high. So I think the ability to integrate without being fluent in Hebrew. I still, to this day, I came with a basic okay Hebrew. To this day, I don't know that it's like good, but it's better. It's certainly not something that I speak all the time, but I think that a lot of people really worry that they are going to flounder if they don't have Hebrew. And I don't think that that's true. I do think that people should, if they're interested in moving here, should be open to learning and should take an Ulpan and should do Rosetta Stone. And you know what I mean? I think that that's really, really important, but I don't think that that should be a deterrent from coming here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that exceeded my expectations, just the way that I was able to immerse myself. But all my other expectations were pretty high and met, you know what I mean? Like I expected people to, be happy and proud of me for being here. And they are. I mean, Israelis think it's absolutely crazy that anyone would ever leave New York. I mean, they think
Yeah, Israelis want to move to New York.
they give me your passport, I will go, and I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, no. We're
yeah,
all
they're
staying here together. Listen, I get why they think. I think that the mentality is money is the motivator, and especially in Israel. And I think that they think that they're going to step off the plane in New York and
be
people
a
are going to
millionaire,
throw bags of money at them.
or
And
they
so,
go work at the mall,
right,
sell like
right.
lotions.
But they, all of them have an uncle named Itzik who made a lot of money in America. So they think that that's going to happen to them. They're all going to be Itzik, But my
Right.
expectations were met. I mean, I don't know that anything was like so crazy different than I thought it would be.
I read a couple of articles in a Jewish magazine. I don't remember which one it was,
Mm-hmm.
and all the articles were geared towards people who wanted to make Aliyah. And the piece of advice that these authors were saying was that have low expectations.
Yes, oh my God, that's so funny. That's what I always say. I always say calibrate expectations. That's like my number one piece of advice. Calibrate your expectations, because
Right. Yeah. Tell us why.
you know, you're not going to be on vacation when you move here. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of people who love Israel and love going to the hotel and love going to the beach, and you know what I mean? Like, I think that, you know, they think that their life is going to be a big vacation, and that's not how it is when you move anywhere. So it's certainly not how it is when you move to Israel. So you need to calibrate your expectations, and you need to, you know, fend for yourself. I think one of the best things about moving as a New Yorker is that the mentality of a New Yorker is very similar to the mentality of an Israeli. We are tough, and we are aggressive, and we are, you know, we take care of ourselves, and those are good qualities some of the time too. So, you know, when someone yells at me or when someone cuts in front of me, I'm okay with it. I can handle it. Whereas someone maybe not from New York might be a little bit taken aback.
You know, it's interesting because I find the rudeness and the like chutzpah of Israelis like really rude. Like,
Right.
and I'm from New York and I'm used to rudeness left and right. But I
Yeah.
find that the attitude and the anger of Israelis is like another level.
I mean, it depends. You know,
Like when
I
someone
don't
screams at me
really.
in Israel, I'm like, mind your manners. I'm like, sit
Right.
down, say please and thank you. Like,
Right. So it's both. It's meaning I don't see it more in Israel than I see it in New York, but you know, it hits different because it's coming from a Jewish person, and it's not coming from someone from a different, you know, community than yours. So that really tends to bother people when, you know, like when it's someone from who's Jewish who's yelling at you. It's generally not ever coming at you with malice. It's generally coming at you, like, you know what I mean? So
it's like bluntness. It's just
right. Listen, I tell everybody all the time, like, you know, when I get off a plane, I gotta separate myself from Israelis for a while, you know, I gotta take a break. But then after a week or two, I miss them.
right.
I miss Israel when I come to America, which is a blessing. Let me tell you, it's a blessing that I never go to America, and as wonderful as of a time as I'm having, that I ever say, oh, I can't believe I have to go back. Never.
What can you advise people about how to deal with this different, tough mentality of Israel?
I would say if you are an American, specifically, I guess we'll talk to North Americans. I would say if you want to be around Anglos, choose an Anglo community.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, as a lot of people will tell you, I kind of live in an Anglo bubble. My friends all speak English. Even the Israeli friends I have speak English. So you can move to a neighborhood where kids are being raised like your kids, and people speak to each other like you guys speak to each other. So that exists in Israel. There are, you know, off the top of my head, Modi'in, Beit Shemesh, most of the neighborhoods in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, you can find places, you know, Hashmonaim, Efrat. I mean, these are places that if you want to live in Israel, but you also need the comfort of living around other Anglos, there are plenty of options for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's like a nice soft landing for a lot of people. I mean, there are some people who say, I want to move to Israel and I'm moving to a kibbutz, you know, in you know, Haifa, and I'm going to learn and I'm going to immerse myself. And to them, I say kol hakavod, but like that was never going to be me. I was never moving into a kibbutz to, you know, work the land.
Right. When you moved to Israel, so did you have to switch careers? What were you doing in America? And then did you continue doing that in Israel or?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I did not.
Okay.
Very
So
good
tell us about
question.
that. Yeah.
So I worked as a speech therapist I have a master's in speech language pathology. So I was a speech therapist, and I was working for an agency, and I was working in all different types of schools. And then I ended up switching fields because as a speech therapist, basically there were a few reasons why I didn't want to pursue speech therapy here. One being the language, two being the differential in terms of how much money you make. it's not a motivator here. It's not a very well paid position. And also you have to take an equivalency exam. So I wouldn't, and in Hebrew, so that was not going to happen for me. So you kind of have to pivot and find out what your talents and your strengths are. So if you're a big talker, if you're a good salesperson, you know what I mean? Like kind of figure out what your milieu is going to be, and how to monetize that. So I'm a writer. I've always been a writer. I have a blog. I wrote for my college, newspaper and my yearbooks and everything like that. So I knew that I was going to do something in writing and research. And I work for a company that does marketing for nonprofits in English. And I also bounced around. When I got here, I was thinking maybe I was going to be a real estate agent for a time. And I worked for an organization called Shalva, which works with special needs children for the time. And I was giving tours. So I was really trying to like find my footing, and you kind of have that ability to do that when you start over again,
Yeah. Is it hard for people to find an English speaking job in Israel?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are certainly not in, the tech world. The tech world is fully functioning in English. So often a native English speaker is preferential to someone who just speaks English. For example, if you wanted to be a content writer for a startup, generally they want native English speakers so that, it sounds like it makes sense to an American reading it, as opposed to, some translation that from an Israeli app that,
Yeah.
But
it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot more jobs if you're fluent in Hebrew. That's going to be the case, in general.
Right.
But the jobs exist, and there are people whose companies can move them. And now what we've seen with COVID is that the ability to work remotely is a reality.
Yeah.
So now's the time that if someone, got a job where they can work remotely and make it work for themselves and for their companies, they should really think about Aliyah as a possibility.
Right. Back in America, I know people choose a career based on income and what it's going to do for them. So, do you think that the decisions that go into your career in Israel, is that the same motivating factor?
No. It's so funny because you say I was never someone who was dying to be a speech therapist because that was my lifelong dream. And I think that every speech therapist will be nodding to that assessment.
Interesting.
Yeah, nobody grows up thinking that they want to be a speech therapist. It's a nice career when you have it, but I decided to be a speech therapist because I was planning to get married at 21 or 22.
A good job for being a mom.
Yeah, and work part-time. I mean, come on, that was, so certainly moving to Israel, that was much less of a motivating factor, especially considering I'm single, and I just really wanted to find something that I was good at, that needed me, and that could support me. So it's much less, I mean, listen, I have a lot of friends who are trying to climb the ladder and trying to, break the ceiling. My mom yells at me that I'm not motivated in that way, but I really like a work-life balance, So
yeah, it's like, in a way, you're not. What's the saying? You're not living to work.
Right. You're not living to work. You're working to live.
You're working to live, to actually live, not to survive. You're working to live an enriching life in Israel.
To enjoy myself. And I certainly, while I'm single and I have this time to myself, to be able to kind of like have a good time in the most vibrant city, certainly in Israel and definitely in the Middle East and possibly in the world. I mean, except for COVID,
Except for COVID.
And I really think that needs to be like established. Like a lot of people have said, should I move to Tel Aviv? And I said, listen, now's not the best time. But in general, it's the best. It's so fun and so wonderful and so great and so worth it.
Do you think it's worth it for all these people moving to Israel right now in the middle of the pandemic? Because I know you just said it now is not the time, but so many people have moved to Israel and they're so frustrated and they got such a bad taste in their mouths about Israel because of the bureaucracy and
Yeah,
all these rules.
it's
So,
hard. It's hard. I mean, Israel definitely has more rules than the States, for the most part. But I do think that we're going to come out of this first. So would I have made Aliyah during a pandemic? Probably not. I probably would have waited.
and you're a
Um,
hardcore Zionist.
yeah, yeah, because you're not getting all the benefits. Like, for example, a lot of people make Aliyah in the summer, right? And
Yeah.
then they get to go to the festivals, and they get to go to the Lights Festival and the Wine Festival and the Food Festival. And what I mean? There's a million things going on that nobody could do this year. So it's a shame,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Your kids, you're putting your kids in a new school with a new language and they're going remote, day 3. I mean, that's not optimal.
Exactly.
So
you might as well stay back home.
Well, I don't think
that's
of it
your
as
opinion
in America.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might as well move when things are a bit more stable, which hopefully will be soon.
Bezrat Hashem.
Amen.
Can you give a piece of advice for people who want to make Aliyah?
Yeah. So I said calibrate expectations.
Yeah.
Make a list. So on your list, you should have things that you need in terms of information, in terms of firsthand accounts. You need to plan for Aliyah. It's a huge move. It's a huge change. And you need to get as much information and stuff figured out before you get here. Don't get here without a plan. I think that people who fail come to Israel on a whim or come to Israel just based on what their heart tells them, and they don't take it seriously and they don't plan accordingly. And I think that if you want to succeed, I also think if you want to succeed here, you can't have one foot in and one foot out. You cannot live in both countries. You have to live in Israel. I mean, you have to. You can't, because if you have one foot in and one foot out, you're leaving. You're leaving. That's just the facts of the matter. I mean, I can tell you.
Or you'll be miserable.
Right. And you're going to make everyone around you miserable.
Yeah, that's true. I know a few people who had this mentality of having one foot in, one foot out, having like a double home. Oh, I have a home in New York, I have a home in Israel. And for years
they have a vacation home in Israel, but they don't have a home in Israel. They live in America.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's the only people I say can have one foot in and one foot out are like radiologists who work, in America and their family lives in Israel. But, at the end of the day, you can really only live in one country. And certainly if the country is Israel, you have to live in Israel full time, because you're always going to be comparing. And that's such a bad way to live. You know what I mean? Like if you commit to a man, you don't also have your ex-boyfriend in your life. That's just a danger.
That's a great comparison.
I just thought of it. I'm like, do it again.
I love that comparison.
Right? Can you imagine?
Jordana, you're very funny.
Your new house with your husband, you're like, let me just see what my ex-boyfriend's up to now. Bad news.
Jordana, I think you should do some comedy on the side too. Guys, check out her series, Brown and Bejewed. It's very funny, actually.
Isn't it going to be so sad when COVID, is over and still everything we do references it, every movie that we have and every comedy special that we have. It's just that they're going to keep sucking us back into this nightmare of a year.
2020. Yeah, exactly.
I'm so happy that it was 2020 because it's easy to remember. When I'm dementia in 80 years, I'm going to remember what year it happened.
That's true.
I remember it was just my birthday, and this is my favorite story to tell. I just had my birthday in Bidud, my birthday in quarantine.
Yes.
And
Yom Holadet Sameach.
Thank you. And we had, I remember that someone said to me, are you going to celebrate when you're out of Bidud? Now, I'm going out of Bidud into a lockdown, so no. But regardless, I wasn't planning on it because I said, remember when in the early days when people did Zoom birthdays, in March, April, and May. And they were like, we're going to celebrate your birthday when this is over. And I said, no, we're not, because everybody has birthdays and time will move on. And I'm not going to go out for drinks for someone whose birthday was April 17th. You know what I mean?
Oh my God,
January.
right.
That's not going to happen. we'll celebrate your next birthday. But then I said, oh, these poor saps from, whose birthdays are in April and May. That's so sad that their birthdays. And then I was like, my birthday is not until December.
Yeah, it's going to be over. Right.
Long over. And I'm going to be, it was not over. So.
Not over. Jordana, we're going to wrap it up, but I wanted to ask you a final question. What are your hopes and dreams for the world?
Wow. Like for the Jewish world, for the world, for the
for
Israel
you, for your, yeah, for
my world. These are all very different questions.
How you see the world. What are your hopes and dreams for what you see in the world?
That was like my favorite thing. It's like, I'm just going to ask you one small question.
Yeah,
like,
I know. It's like huge question.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, why are we here?
I have to save it for last.
For the world peace. Okay. No, I don't think that globally. I really do hope that everyone is healthy and happy, whatever that means to them. But my real focuses are on the United States and Israel, and much more so Israel. I hope that Israel is safe. I hope that Israel comes out from the scourge of COVID. I hope that's what I hope. I mean, I hope that in a year from now, every country in every part of the world is saying, can you believe that crazy year that we had? Thank God we're done. You hear all these doomsday predictions that, the government's never going to give control back to us, and we're never going to not wear masks. And I'm an optimist, and I believe that things will get better in that way. And then I, for the people in my world, I wish them health and happiness always. For the Jewish world, I wish safety. I want to say to the Jews of Europe and to the Jews of North America, you don't be chased here. Come here because this is your home. Don't wait until things get so bad, which they will or will not. Don't wait to be chased here. I tell that to my family all the time. They're like, you're a bummer. But just realize that Israel is here for you, and that Israel is the people it's made up of. So if it's made up of another 5 million Americans, then it's going to be a lot more palatable to Americans, And
I like the way you put that.
I mean, it's even just now, it's so different than how it was 20, 30 years ago because of the influence of the French and of the
Americans and
the South Africans and the Australians and the Brits. You know what I mean? Like, it's really like an amalgam of all the Jews from around the world. And then for my own life, I mean, for my own life, I mean, I just hope to continue to be positive about being here and to hopefully be a resource for people who are interested in coming here, and to be a resource for single people who want to move here, and maybe one day to be a resource for married people and mothers, and and I just want to be a good representative of an Olah,
And you made a very good impression on me, and I'm sure whoever's listening has a very great impression of you. I learned so much from you. Thank you for sharing your life story. I mean, not your whole life story, but a small snippet of it, and for sharing the beauty of Israel and that it's a beautiful place to live in. And even though it has its challenges.
Totally.
And setbacks.
America has so many challenges. We're just used to them. They're challenges that we grew up with. And so we've kind of become resigned to them. So these are just different challenges that you have.
Different challenges. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jordana, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Oh, okay. So I am on Instagram. I am at Jordana_Brown. So if you have any questions, you can definitely find me over there. I'm Jordana Brown on Facebook. You'll probably go to my others folder, but I'll try and notice you. I look like this in my profile picture for the most part, but it's like the best picture I ever took. So
wait, on which app?
What?
Which on Facebook?
On Facebook, yeah.
Oh, on Facebook, okay.
You can find me on, JSwipe and Bumble. No, I'm just kidding.
Where's your blog? How can people access your blog?
I have My blog, yes, that was the last. My blog is Jordana takes Tel Aviv. .blogspot.com. It used to be Jordana in Jerusalem, but now it's Jordana takes Tel Aviv. .blogspot.com. And I think it's funny, it's cute.
Very nice. Jordana, thank you so much for being here.
For having me. What an honor. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.